to Wired In with Appaveli. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to talk about the podcast and what I want this podcast to be about. I launched the podcast. First, I'll tell you my name is Dominique Terry, aka Appaveli. Appaveli is my nickname. I guess you can say a gimmick. I'm a software developer. I'm an independent software engineer, app developer, whatever you want to call me. I have a passion for developing apps to run on a multitude of devices. I enjoy learning new things. I have other hobbies. I like to watch wrestling from time to time. I like to listen to music. I like to read books. I like to be in tune with nature, meditate, and I also like to share my experiences with others. And that's why I'm launching the podcast, is to share my experiences with software development. There are a lot of great podcasts out there that talk about software development, trending topics. But I kind of want to do something different. I want to really get wired in. Now, wired in is a term that we use as software developers when we have to really focus and really we're in deep concentration. We're tuning out the outside world and we're creating our own world, and we're really focused on solving the problem at hand. And when you're wired in, usually you have headphones on, you might listen to music, focus music, and you're just in your own world. And if that's interrupted, then that could be bad. Then you have to start all over, and it can be pretty bad. So the purpose of this podcast is, like I said, to share my experiences with coding. I want to talk about different paradigms of software development, coding. I guess you can say this will be like a tutorial podcast. I'm also have a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel will be called Wired In with Appaveli. I will post the link in the description. The podcast should be available on all platforms where you can listen and download podcasts. And basically, I just want to talk about, different languages, different paradigms. Maybe just dive in and dissect code. We're just going to get wired in together. Whether you listen and follow along, whatever's comfortable for you. I'm going to have code on my GitHub that you can download and follow along with me on the podcast or watch it on YouTube. So this should be pretty fun. I think I'm going to start off next week, maybe doing UWP development. I might do some Android, maybe iOS, maybe web development. We might dive into some Swift, Java, JavaScript, C#, C++, whatever I feel like talking about. We're just going to get wired in and we're going to talk about code and dissect it. And hopefully you have a better understanding of reading code and writing code. That's the purpose of the podcast. From time to time, I might have guests on the show, and we'll get wired in with our guests. From time to time, I may just want to talk about one of my apps that I developed. We'll get wired in and you can hear behind the scenes. Had to get a sip of water. So, with this first episode, I just want to talk about a little bit, tell you about myself, share my experiences and my journey along the way as an independent software developer. So, like I said, my name's Dominique Terry, aka Appaveli. I've been coding for about 10 years now. I first learned how to code in 2009 while I was in college. I hated coding at first. I didn't think I was good. And lo and behold, I'm here now. So, how I got into programming is in 2010, I decided to go to the movies and watch The Social Network. And I'm like, okay, let's see what this is about. And it's about the creation of Facebook, but I was really inspired that, Zuckerberg just created Facebook in his dorm. He built the product, and it's probably the most widely used social network today. And so that just inspired me to go home and write my first program outside of school. And the first program I wrote, or I engineered, is Economics Calculator, which you can download on Android, Windows 10 devices. And at the time, I was in an economics class, and we were allowed to use a calculator. So I said, you know what? Let me take some of my programming experiences and see if I can build a calculator. Well, I engineered the calculator, and I shared it with my classmates. Now, once I shared it with my classmates, they were like, wow, this is cool. I want to use this. And plus, we got, of course, we had to get permission from the teacher to actually use the calculator, and he was fine with it. But I saw the joy of them using something that I created, and I said, you know what? I'm going to dive deeper into this. So I started ordering books, and I just really got wired in. I started teaching myself more about Java, PHP, Python, JavaScript, C++. I mean, I want to learn all the languages. But it's impossible to learn all the languages, right? Well, I decided to pick a language and stick with it. I decided to run with Java. And then I started to do Android development. And then I ported my economics calculator for Android. Then I decided to dive into Windows phone development using C#. And then I became a Windows developer. And then I said, you know what, this is something I want to do. But my main concern in college, how am I going to get a job learning the things that I learned in school? Because when I looked at job requirements, we were not learning certain technologies. For example, with Java, we didn't learn the frameworks Spring, Hibernate, Struts. We didn't learn web services. So I was like, what am I going to do? And at the time, mobile development became popular, and I said, you know what? I'm going to teach myself mobile development. So I just decided to run with Windows because it was an open market. I decided to run with Android because it was a $25 lifetime license. Windows was $19 lifetime license. I didn't have a Mac, so I didn't bother with iOS. And I couldn't afford paying $100 annual fee. So I said, these are two platforms I'm going to target. So I'm creating apps. And I said, you know what? I want to start my own company. But I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to create apps. So I applied for a job. And I got hired. I became a contractor. I became a contractor doing Java as a Java developer, creating enterprise applications. That was a good experience for me. but it was really rough to travel and not knowing if your contract is going to last the entire for the duration of the time period that was, given. Or if the project didn't last long, I experienced budget cuts where I would be let go, and a lot of times people wouldn't hire me as a full-time developer because I didn't have enough experience. And even today, most companies would prefer to contract software development. So in 2016, I started having health problems because I have myasthenia gravis. I'll talk about that in another time, but a brief overview of that is muscle weakness, autoimmune disease that affects the muscles. So I had to reset and figure out what I wanted to do. I was stressed out from the last job, and I decided to, probably best if I start my own company. I can set my own hours. I can create software that I want to use, software that I can release to consumers, enterprises. So I didn't have a name, and I decided to call the company Pragmatic Dev Solutions. And I formed this company, the name, in April 2016. And the first thing I did was purchase the domain name. I said, okay, it's meant to be. And the reason why I chose pragmatic is because I'm a pragmatic individual. The software I develop is very pragmatic. It's very practical. I build simple applications that solve a problem. And one of the flagship app for Pragmatic Dev Solutions is my app called My Basketball Playbook. My Basketball Playbook is available on Android. It's available for Windows 10 devices, PC, tablet, Xbox. It's been a top paid sports app for the last 3 years. It's been a top paid app. I developed the app back in 2014, but due to me working on other projects, I had to put that project on hold. And in 2016, when I re-engineered the application, it became a top paid app, along with Hockey Playbook, Wedding Budget Planner, Vision Board. Those are some of my top apps in the Microsoft Store. So then I said to myself, well, I need to get an LLC. So once my contract was finished with the last company I worked for, I decided to take money I had saved and purchase an LLC and get things that I needed to start my company. So my company formed. I became a registered agent with the state I live in on January 24th, 2017. And, it's a lot of ups and downs because I'm just one person. I create apps. I have to handle the marketing. I have to, social media. I have to engage. I have to constantly update all my apps. It can be overwhelming at times, and some days you just feel like, how am I able to do this? But I love what I do, and I'd rather be super busy and then be bored, doing the same task every day on a job, working for a company, building software that I know I'll never use or get credit for. Software I release own the product 100%. I just split the revenue with the app stores and everything is good. So while I'm on this journey, I can really relate to other indie developers that spend years building products or a product, and in the beginning you're not really making a lot of money, and people think because you're independent, things are perfect, you have the dream life. It's not like that. You have to work harder than the average person. You pretty much don't have a life. I came up with a quote years ago that your passion should be your entertainment. My passion is my entertainment, meaning I made a sacrifice. I'm sacrificing watching sports all the time, watching wrestling all the time, and I'm focusing more on building my empire, building apps, trying to get better. When you're an entrepreneur, you're thinking about this 24/7. Even when you're not physically in front of a computer, when you're walking, when you're eating, you're always thinking about how can I get better? And that's what I'm thinking about all the time. So I wanted to do a podcast to kind of share my journey with other software developers or inspiring software developers. I want to be able to do a podcast where someone wants to learn coding, whether they want to be an entrepreneur or they want to work for a corporation. I want to share some of my experiences. What kind of applications do you build? I want to be able to build small applications and help you build your portfolio. So we might, on the podcast, we might build a small enterprise application using the Spring framework so you can understand how the framework works. We might build a mobile app, line of business app. That way you can gain the experience on what it's like building this kind of application. So I want to be able to share that with others. I want to share things that you're not really taught in school. We'll go over the basics sometimes of a language. We may dissect many different languages to talk about different paradigms. If we want to talk about functional programming, we might talk about JavaScript. We might dissect old languages like Scheme. We want to get into more enterprise web development. We'll talk about Java. You want to build mobile apps. We'll talk about Java, Swift, C#. We'll talk about Xamarin. We'll just get wired in together and go through a journey and build some cool applications. I think it's important as a software developer that we give back to the community and share our knowledge and our experiences. And that's what I plan on doing. That's what I plan on doing every week, at least once a week, maybe twice. I may launch a podcast every Monday, upload the code to GitHub, have the link in the description. If you're on the computer or on your phone or tablet, you can listen to the podcast and look at the GitHub code. And maybe some of the apps or code we write can help you solve a problem that you might struggle with. We'll talk about data structures. We'll talk about design patterns. You really don't hear about design patterns in school. We'll talk about the singleton pattern, the factory pattern, when to use these design patterns. We'll talk about how to structure your code, how to make readable code, how to make efficient code. We'll talk about the importance of building your own library. I'll talk about how it's important to build reusable, to write reusable code. The purpose of that. That might be the first official episode where we get wired in and talk about coding. I might talk about reusable code frameworks. We have a lot of third-party libraries, but I feel like as developers, you should understand the language instead of just relying on the framework. And I'll talk about that as we get wired in. Excuse me. We'll talk about that. So, I'm excited to share my knowledge. Hope we grow together. If you have suggestions, I'm always open to that. I'll post my social media where you can reach me. I'm on Twitter, Instagram. I'm mostly on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook, but the company I run is on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter at Appaveli, Appaveli. Same on Twitter at Appaveli. And on Facebook, if you want to reach me, you can contact me through my company page, Pragmatic Dev Solutions. That's the company. So that's how you can reach me on the social channels. So that's it for this introduction. I hope we can all learn together. I hope we all get wired in. And I hope you're just as passionate as I am about coding. Because if you want to go on this path to be a software developer, you need to really have patience. You got to have the passion. You have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to be able to adapt and learn new technologies very fast, especially if you're working for a company. I'm going to talk about all of that. I'm going to share some experiences, work through some examples. This is the learning experience. This is a learning podcast. It's a learning experience for me because I'm learning as well by doing this podcast. So we'll all learn together. That's it. Oh, also, website, www.pragmaticdevsolutions.com. I'll post the links in the description. I'll post the links to my apps and GitHub. That way you can reach me on all channels. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. So now I'm going to go write some code. You should go write some code too. Let's get wired in. And I am out.